This is a HeadGum podcast.
Welcome to the Jeff Rubin Show. I am Jeff Rubin, and today on the Skype phone, I am talking to Sean Kelly from the National Video Game Museum. Hey, Sean, how you doing?
What's going on, Jeff?
National Video Game Museum. This is something I've waited for to exist my whole life. I mean, let's start with just the basics. Where is this thing?
We're in Frisco, Texas. It's about 30 miles north of Dallas.
And what is the museum?
Well, what isn't the museum? How could there not be a video game museum, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's my favorite kind of guess for the show, is something where when you hear about it, you're like, wait, that's a thing? But then when you think about it for just a few seconds, you say, oh, of course that's a thing. So it's not like, what do you mean there's a video game museum? But there's a million ways you could do a video game museum. So I'm curious, if there's like an explicit goal of the museum and kind of what the aesthetic and what the feel is like, all that type of stuff.
A couple of things. First of all, we started our organization about 15 years ago. We've been doing traveling exhibits all over the country. We've done E3 for the last 12 years. We've done South by Southwest. We've done PAX. We've done DICE. We've done Game Developers Conference. We've done traveling shows all over the country, as many as 5 or 6 a year.
I think I saw you at E3 last year. It was like it was Pixels themed. The movie was coming out, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I saw that. It was great. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, we've done that kind of exhibit at E3. In fact, we've won Best in Show a couple of times at E3, beating out Microsoft and Nintendo who spent millions to put on their exhibit. But we've done that type of exhibit, like I said, for about the past 15 years, and we decided about 6 years ago that we needed to make a permanent home for our collection. Everybody comes to E3 or South by Southwest or whatnot, and they really got a kick out of our exhibit. And the biggest question that we've been asked over the years at those exhibits is, where can I see this the rest of the year? So in about 2009, I guess that's a little longer than 6 years ago now, but about 2009 we decided to form a nonprofit with the goal of finding a permanent home for our collection. We did that this year. We finally opened, like I said, in Frisco, Texas. And the point of the museum, the main point of the museum, is to kind of educate people as to the history of the video game industry. It's an important part of American popular culture, of global popular culture, for that matter. And it was amazing to us that there wasn't a museum, a real museum anywhere in the country that was dedicated to kind of not only presenting the history of the video game industry, but also preserving it. There are a couple different organizations that have video game sections. The Strong up in Rochester, New York, has a great video game collection, and they have a pretty cool video game exhibit there. But at the end of the day, the Strong is a toy museum. And there are a couple other organizations that are like that have put together decent video game collections, but there was none that was their only focus, and that's what we felt was important.
And when you say we, who is we in this situation?
It's there's three of us. My partner John Hardy, who lives there in New York, actually in Valley Stream, and my other partner Joe Santulli, who did live in Pompton Lakes, New Jersey. He actually moved to Texas. He's living in Texas right now. John and I both have school age kids, so we haven't been able to make that voyage just yet. But John's working on it now, and I don't know. We'll see what happens with me in the next couple of years. But right now, Joe is living in Texas, working at the museum 6 days a week.
And then, how did you guys end up? Why Texas, of all places?
Well, we did a lot of searching. We talked to a lot of different cities, and our knee-jerk reaction was that the National Video Game Museum belonged in Silicon Valley. That's where video games were born.
I think they have a computer history museum there. Not a video game, though presumably they have something video game related to there, but I think there's a computer museum there. Is that not right?
It is. There is a computer history museum, and they're the same kind of thing. Computer history museum is great, and in fact, they were probably our biggest inspiration for our museum. We got a behind-the-scenes tour of the Computer History Museum back around 2007 or 2008, and that's kind of what, we need to do this just for video games. And they have some video game stuff in the Computer History Museum. They have an amazing display. Their focus was computers, and as cool as that was to us, because we're all pretty big computer geeks as well, it just wasn't exactly what we were looking for. So we shopped the idea around a little bit in California, and the part of the problem was that at the time that we were looking to kind of move our plans forward for a physical museum. The country was in the heart of the big recession in 2009, 2010, and California was hit pretty hard by that. And California didn't have any money. It's in order to do something like this and do it properly and with the proper amount of respect that we wanted to give it, you had to have some money. And California, most of the cities that we talked to, they were interested, but they didn't want to have to, put in any effort or more specifically put in any money to make it happen. It was at one of the traveling shows that we were doing. Specifically, this was the DICE Summit, which was held in Las Vegas. The DICE Summit was it's mainly like industry executives, company heads or department heads, and they all get together and they put on a show where they hand out some awards there, and the Software Development Association is the one that sponsors it. And at that show, we had kind of a small exhibit. There wasn't a lot of space for us, but they asked us to put something together, and we put it together. And we met Randy Pitchford there. And Randy Pitchford is the president of Gearbox Software, Borderlands, Brothers in Arms. They just came out with Battleborn. Randy saw our exhibit at DICE and said, "Wow, you guys want to build a museum? Well, I've been thinking about doing the same thing." And quite honestly, we've had those kind of conversations with people dozens and dozens of times over the years. So I have to show my true colors to some extent. I'm not. My partner John and I were the ones that were doing that show in Las Vegas. But John and I aren't really modern gamers. We don't really have a lot of time. We have families with kids. We don't have a lot of time to devote to modern games. We're much more well-versed in vintage gaming than we were at modern gaming. And we didn't honestly know who Randy Pitchford was. We kind of thought he was another... And we've told Randy this story to his face, so I can say this. We thought he was another crackpot that just wanted, I want to make a museum, sure.
But for those that don't know, Gearbox, pretty well-respected developer, and Randy Pitchford, like one of the small handful of video game industry professionals whose name is sort of known in the community. Like, it's not like movies where everyone knows who directed every movie, but Randy Pitchford is a personality that people are familiar with and respect.
People know him, absolutely. I come to find out, Randy was the driving force or had a big hand in Half-Life 2, which isn't, modern or vintage gaming, but Half-Life 2 I played a lot of, and it was a great game.
Stone Cold Plat. I mean, it's I think generally regarded as one of the best of all time, right?
And absolutely, he did a lot of work on Counter-Strike. Randy had his hand in some of my favorite games of all time, but I just didn't know who the man was. I'd never read up about him, and like I said, we kind of brushed him off. Thought he was just another one of those guys that just spewing out an idea and didn't really have any. So after that DICE show, we decided to circle around and drop him an email, and right away Randy said, "Well, why don't you guys come on down? I have the perfect place for the museum." And he, at that time, his company was headquartered in Plano, but he was about to move to Frisco. he said, "Why don't you guys come on down and take a look at the area and I even have a spot picked out. I have something that would work perfect for you guys." So we went down and we met with Randy, and right away, when we got to Texas, like I said, the rest of the country was in the heart of the recession, but in Texas there was no recession. These guys were working. There was construction everywhere. Frisco was building, and it was amazing to see because I live in Chicago and there was nothing going on in Chicago. One of the guys who worked for me was a union electrician and hadn't worked for 2 years. Kind of working part time for me to try and make ends meet. But in Texas, so much was going on. Just amazing amount of activity there for the time, and we could tell right away these guys are doing something right down here. They understand, or everybody else was having trouble, but Texas was thriving through Randy's relationship with the city of Frisco in bringing his hundreds of millions of dollar company into the city. He had a lot of contacts with the city council. He was friends with the mayor, and basically what Randy did was he went to his contacts in Frisco and said, listen to what these guys have to say, and if you don't like their idea, fine. But he was the one that got us an audience with the people that could make it happen. And right away we went down there. We did a presentation before the city council and the mayor, and they loved it. They absolutely loved the idea. They couldn't understand, like us, they couldn't understand why there was no video game museum in the country, and they wanted it to be in Frisco. So we had a series of meetings and conference calls and things over the next few months, and they made it happen. Frisco wanted the National Videogame Museum there. We love the area. It's kind of centrally located in the country, and some of the things that we came to find out over time is there are more. There's only one state in the whole country that has more video game related jobs, and that's California. But Texas is second, and it's close. So there's a lot going on, video game wise, and certainly technology wise in Texas. And as much as I wouldn't have thought of that area without it being pointed out to me, it's a really good fit. It definitely is a good fit.
Earlier, you said goal of the museum, educate people about the history of video games because it's important. Now, I agree with you. I do think video games are important, but there are some out there who might challenge that. So for those people, to play devil's advocate, why are video games important? Aren't they just goofy fun and kids play them or whatever? Like, why is it actually important to educate people about the history of video games?
Well, first of all, I mean, if you think of it in terms of a career path, if nothing else. So if you look at the kids, and we've actually just started accepting field trip requests at the end of the school year. So we only did about 15 of them or so.
Oh my God! If my school took a field trip to the video game museum, that would have been the best day of my pre-college education. Like, I can't even wrap my head around the idea of a school field trip there. Wow.
That was one of the things that we were worried about with that, because exactly what you're saying.
So, how do you convince the teacher? There's got to be a teacher who's like, I'm not bringing the kids here so they can go play Donkey Kong all day. I know, I'm not. I don't have that point of view at all, but certainly, some teacher is going to say that at some point. What do you say to them? How educational is it really, and how do you convince people?
That's exactly what we were worried about. So, the teachers are the ones that come to us. They send us emails, I want to bring my group there. And what we were thinking early on is, well, how are these teachers going to be able to go back to their superintendent or their board of education and say, I'm going to bring a group of 50 kids to the National Videogame Museum. And they're going to say, what? They're just going to hang out and play Mario Brothers all day? How is that educational?
Well, it kind of sounds like it's an arcade. It could be an arcade.
To some extent, well, we do have a...
I'm sure it is arcade-like, but, it's to the principal or whatever. It sounds like you might as well just be saying, I'm going to take the kids to the arcade.
That's true. But if you have to think about what's behind the video game. So, the acronym, and that's commonly thrown around in educational circles is STEM, and stands for science, technology, what the heck is
electronics? Maybe engineering? One of the two, right?
Engineering and math. And then there's another one that they add an A to it for STEAM, and A is art. So if you look at all of those letters in the acronym, video games can cover every one of those bases. Science is obviously there's a whole lot going on as far as science is the most difficult one, but there's a whole lot going on every other front. There's certainly technology. There's technology in every aspect of video games. There's engineering perfect example. We have a classroom in the museum right now, and we're building. We're having somebody in there that's decorating, and on the wall she's painting all the different aspects of video game development, from like the code to wireframe models to the final product. And she's got all sorts of different sample code and like I said, the different wireframe models and different recognizable video game characters in there. But all of that is involved in engineering. If you're engineering a game, there's a lot you have to figure out. Physics, the motion, and the how fast can this guy move, or how slow will the rain fall. And granted, there are tools that help you figure all of that out within games, but you have to have a basic understanding of all of those things before you can even get involved in developing that game. But every one of those letters in the acronym, the art, the music. I mean, if you take a look at the art of video games, there are companies that do nothing but displays of art in video games. It's absolutely a work of art. Many of these games, and you can define a work of art in many different ways. I mean, maybe it's not visually stunning, but take a look at something like Pitfall on Atari 2600. Is Pitfall a work of art? Well, no, it doesn't really look like a work of art. Maybe the pixelated scorpion that's underneath the ground that you're walking on isn't visually artistic, but the way that David Crane brought all of those elements together into the perfect game at the time, in our opinion, it's certainly a work of art. But the bottom line is as we cover every letter of those acronyms, it all boils down to a career path. I mean, isn't that what that school is preparing you for? You can go to school for 8 years in grammar school and 4 years in high school and 4 or 8 or 12 years in college, and the end result is to get you into a job. So the idea, one of the basic premises behind the museum is to show people, here's what's involved in making a game. Here's what's involved making a game back then. Here's what's involved making a game now, and kind of expose people that come through the museum to all the different aspects of making video games. And it's not just some guy sitting behind a computer typing, and there's a lot more to it. And like I said, to kind of be able to go through the evolution of that process in the museum, it's very worthwhile. And quite honestly, like I said, I was a little concerned with trying to sell that to educators, but I haven't really had to. It's the teachers come in with their groups of students, and they're blown away. They're absolutely blown away in what these kids. And it's not just, yes, they're going to play some Mario Brothers, and yes, they're going to play Pac-Man in our arcade. But there's a lot more to it. If as these kids go through, station to station, we have 18 or 19 different exhibits in the museum. But as they go from exhibit to exhibit, they learn about the sound in video games. They learn about the controls in video games. They learn about some of the electronics behind it. There's a whole lot going on other than just playing video games in the museum.
So how do you get people thinking about, and how do you get, I guess, kids in particular thinking about these behind-the-scenes elements at a level that they're not thinking about when they're just playing at home or on their phones or wherever?
Well, basically, you expose them to it. If they're sitting down in front of their Xbox One playing Call of Duty, all they're doing is thinking about shooting the guy on the other end of the screen. But if you actually go through and you see the inner workings, or you play a Pong system, and it's funny, in the museum we have the world's largest Pong console. It's 15 feet wide by 6 or so feet deep, and 5 feet tall. But and the paddles are the size of like a car steering wheel. So people stand at that Pong machine, and they're actually able to play play Pong on this giant thing. But it's funny to see like a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old boy or girl, for that matter, stand at this ancient Pong machine and screaming and yelling and high-fiving and punching the guy next to him. This is Pong, you know. But it's great to be able to see kids get excited about something so simple. But that's the beginning of the process of the museum. So you start at Pong and you end in our 80s arcade. But you know, as you go through that whole process, you're seeing all the different aspects. We have a big section of the museum that deals with third-party development, and in that, all the handmade electronic devices that people use to try and figure out how to make their own games over the years. Or we have a section in that same exhibit that shows all the homebrew games. So people today that are making modern games, or making games for original Nintendo, or making games for Atari in their basements now because the tools are available to them. All of that exposure kind of sparks a little bit of interest in these kids that isn't available from them just sitting down in front of their Xbox. And like I said, the feedback that we've had from the educators has been phenomenal.
What kind of feedback are they giving you?
Oh my gosh, we had a great time. It was unbelievable how much the kids learned. We spent the whole next day talking about what we saw there. Basically things like that. It's I'm trying to think of specific comments, but I don't have any of the emails in front of me. But nothing but positive, and like I said, without any real effort on our part, like to try and sell it to them. Certainly, we meet them in the beginning of their field trip, and we give them a little talk, and tell them what to expect as they go through the museum. But we're not trying to pound this into the teachers' head. Look how much they're going to learn. We kind of just set them free and let them do their own thing in the museum, and just in exploring on their own. They found it incredibly educational, and nobody has been disappointed so far. We're really excited.
So what kind of exhibits are there? You mentioned a few. Just when you're starting a video game museum and you have the building, like, how do you begin to decide what the exhibits are going to be and what the experience is going to be like? Yeah,
that was fun and annoying at the same time. It was kind of difficult. We have a little over 10,000 square feet, maybe 11,000 square feet in the building that we have. So it's a pretty good sized building. But during that process, when we were going through talking to the city and the mayor and the council and everybody explaining what we were going to do, we had to come up with a lot of different ideas for exactly that. So our initial exhibit list was 56 different concepts. In the space itself, we only had room for 18. So we went through our list of concepts, and we kind of assigned categories to them, and we basically voted on them over and over, and assigned 1 to 10 ratings for each of the different categories, and we kind of pared it down that way to the final 18. But we have. Trying to think of some of the more interesting exhibits that we can put. For example, we did a 40-foot section of wall on the rise and the crash of the video game industry, or crash and rise. So basically, what that exhibit is it's describing what happened, why the video game industry crashed in 1984, and what happened as a result of that, as computers began to kind of take over where video games left off, and then eventually, video games came back into the mix. But there was a period in 1984 where no video game consoles were being made, and gamers were a little fed up with the lack of quality in the video games, and a lot of parents were looking at computers to be the next thing. So there was a kind of a little period of limbo. So what we did at that time for that exhibit is we built an 80s video game store. So in this store, you got this guy who's been riding the wave of popularity for the last 5 to 8 years, making a whole bunch of money. This is a mom and pop store, and all of a sudden, about the end of 1983, people stopped coming into his store. So he's marking everything down. He's got dump bins on the floor full of games for half price. He's got all the old posters. So we did that in the museum, in a corner of that exhibit. We built that 80s mock store, and there's the actual live product in the store lining the wall with new in the box Atari 2600 games or Intellivision games and vintage posters on the wall. And we have a going out of business banner hanging up in there. This poor guy just showed up for work one day and just suddenly realized that the video game industry was crashing, and he didn't really understand why and didn't know what the heck he was going to do with himself. But that's kind of a popular section. People look at the different items that we have in the display case for that store, and a lot of pictures are taken in there. People ringing themselves up on a 80s register. Also in that same section, we have on the opposite wall, there's a 40-foot section of vintage computers. So you can actually walk up to a TI 99-4A and play a game, or you can load a cassette game off of a TRS-80 Model 1 and try and play that game after you've gone and had lunch waiting for the cassette to load. We have a Commodore 64 in there where you can type load asterisk comma 8 comma 1 and load whatever game happens to be in that drive and play it in there. The idea there was that we want people to experience what computers were like back then. We have an acoustic modem on one of these things where some of the kids that walk up to this thing have absolutely no idea what the heck it's supposed to do or what to do with it, for that matter. It's fun, and the original plan was not to tell anybody how to do it, but that didn't last very long because people gave up pretty quick. So now we printed instructions how to load a game onto the Commodore 64. Otherwise, nobody would be able to figure it out.
That's such a video game fan thing to do, to make it a little quest for someone to figure out how to actually engage with the museum.
Right, exactly. That's what we thought, and that's the three of us, right? Yeah, let's not tell them. This is perfect. Let's let them figure it out themselves. But they don't figure it out. In fact, especially the younger kids, adults would sit there and mess around with it a little bit, but the younger kids give up. This is stupid. I'm not, So we give them a little bit of a hint and get them started, and it's actually become pretty popular. They spend a lot of time there and enjoy the interaction with the old computers. We have an old 8088 IBM PC in there with an MFM 5 megabyte hard drive on it. It's a lot of fun. Although keeping that stuff running has been a little bit of a challenge, but so far we've had pretty good luck.
Is this stuff? It's funny. Yeah, that stuff belongs in a museum, and I guess that's where you put it.
Exactly.
Is this stuff you already had?
Yeah, between the three of us, John, Joe, and I, we've been collecting this stuff for 30 years. To try and build a collection like what we've amassed today would be impossible.
So wait, the museum is built of the personal collection of you three guys.
Exactly, and by far between the three of us, we have the largest collection in the world of video game hardware, software, memorabilia, documentation, and nobody has more.
When did you start collecting video games? I know you said 30 years ago, but do you remember being like, I think I'm going to start collecting these?
I vividly remember it, actually.
What was that moment like?
Well, like everybody else, I lived through the video game market's creation and its crash, and a lot of most people will tell you that the cause for the crash was the poor software, and everybody says E.T. killed the video game. Of course, that's not true. E.T. is one of many games that kind of led to the crash of the video game industry. But there's a lot of different factors. But one of the factors that causes the crash that a lot of people don't really talk about is the kind of the generational thing. If you look at the video game industry today, there is a lot more crap out there than there was in 1984. But you have multiple generations to keep the video game industry going. At that time, there was really only one age group that was playing video games, and in my opinion, one of the reasons for the crash that people don't talk about, and certainly the reason why I got out of video games, is because we all kind of grew up at the same time. So when I hit 16, 17 years old, which was about 1984, I realized that there were these other creatures walking around the earth that were of the opposite sex, and I wanted to grab me one of those. So that's exactly what I did. I got rid of my Intellivision. I sold it. I got a car. I went chasing girls for a couple of years. I grabbed one who is actually still my wife today, and.
Back to video games.
That's exactly what happened.
Mission accomplished.
1988, I had grabbed me a girl. I wasn't married yet. I got married in 1989, but I wasn't married yet. But I was well on my way to getting married. In 1988, I started a BBS called the Classic Game Survival Group. And
now, BBSs, we got to explain what that is for some of the young folk who might be listening.
Well, you know, I'm sure, but what a BBS is, BBS stands for Bulletin Board System, and this was long before there was an internet. So if you wanted to communicate with other people over your computer, you had to dial a phone number with your computer and connect to somebody else's computer. It was one-on-one. Some of the BBSs had multiple lines, but most of the smaller ones only had one line. So you would be able to call into that BBS and browse whatever files or whatever message boards were on that BBS.
So it's like a proto-internet where instead of connecting to like the global internet computer system, you were connecting to like one hobbyist, usually a hobbyist, I guess, computer. Yep. One person was running a computer that you would dial into, and you could write a message, and there's message boards, and other people would dial in and leave things to each other, which sounds very primitive, but at the time, like, it was just, really cutting edge. So you were running one of these? Like, you were the person with the computer that other people were dialing into?
Yeah, 1988. It was called the Classic Game Survival Group. It was run, the BBS was run on my Amiga 500. So it was, and the sole purpose of my BBS was to get together with other people who were collecting video games, and that was where my collection began. My collection began in an effort to get back all of the Intellivision games that I had sold off just 3 or 4 years earlier, and now I wanted them all back. And I had started scrounging the local flea markets, and you could pick those games up for a dime a dozen at that time. They were dirt cheap because nobody else wanted them, but I wanted them. And not only did I want them, I started picking up other games for other systems that I didn't really care as much about, just to use as like trade bait with some of my friends on my BBS. So I got this guy calling in, and he's an Atari 2600 collector. Well, I don't really collect Atari games, but I'll grab them at the flea market because they're cheap, and we'll do some trading, and maybe I can get some stuff that I really want. So my collecting got pretty crisy in about 1999. I had amassed over 50,000 games in my collection, and they actually did a story on me in Wired magazine called A Man in His Garage. I forget what the heck it was called, but all about the number of games that I had amassed over the years. But that's that was how I got started. John and Joe were basically the same way. I'd say that John and Joe maybe didn't have that couple-year hiatus where they were out of it. Joe is by far the biggest hardcore gamer I know. He's always playing something. And Joe is the modern guy of the three of us. He had an Atari 2600. He had Intellivision. He collected all the vintage stuff as well. But Joe still plays and keeps up with the best of them on Xbox 360 or Xbox One. And you catch him online. He's playing whatever the newest game is. He's real hardcore. He's thousands and thousands of Xbox achievement points, and I have zero.
You do not keep up with like modern games? You're mostly focused on the retro stuff in the museum?
Like I said, my biggest problem is that I don't have a lot of time for it. So I have 4 daughters. I have 2 in college. I just don't have a lot of time for it. I try when I can play, but like I said, it's just difficult for me to find the time. I played some Borderlands. I played a little bit of Battleborn. I'm actually about tonight. I just bought a new graphics card for my computer, and I'm going to get on to Overwatch tonight and play a little bit of that. But I don't have the time to dedicate to those games that it requires to get good at those games. I played a little World of Warcraft for a while too, but the problem is you have to put in so much time to be able to get good at those games, and if you're not good, they yell at you. So I don't really enjoy modern gaming that much. Most of it's not for the casual guy that I am, as far as that's concerned.
What have you noticed about how the kids today, let me just like check myself because I just used the phrase the kids today.
Yeah.
What have you noticed about what the kids today and how they react to the retro games? Like when they come to the museum and they do play something like, forget the giant Pong because that's obviously got a novelty value, but do kids enjoy Atari 2600 games or forget Atari 2600? What about NES, SNES?
They do. It's really cool. You know, we have two things set up in the museum. Two other exhibits. We have an 80s living room and an 80s bedroom. So in the 80s living room, we have wood grain paneling and a velour painting of some random matador on the wall. We have an old console TV, a vintage 80s couch and coffee table, and in that 80s bedroom. Or living room rather, all day long. That's what kids are sitting down. They're playing right now we have an Intellivision running in the 80s bedroom, and I'll tell you, the kids are sitting down. One of the most popular games that we have in that area is Shark. If you've ever played it,
I don't know that I have Shark.
It's a great game.
What's it on? An arcade game?
No, it's an original concept. Basically, it's two little fish. So the whole idea is you're swimming around and you can only eat fish that are smaller than you. But as you eat these small fish, you grow in size. So you can, and there's a shark, which is you're never bigger than, and he always wants to kill you. But and if you get bigger than the other player, you can eat the other player as well.
Oh, that kind of sounds like. Have you heard of Agario, which is a popular game on the web these days?
I have not.
These days, it's similar in just that it's you're a small thing and you eat things that are smaller than you to increase your size, and like you just try to get bigger and eat other people. But I like that shark element.
It was fun. It's a lot of fun. I had a blast with that. You know, it's one of the few games that I was able to get my daughters into on the classic consoles. But anyway, Shark is playing in that living room, and kids are playing that all day long, screaming and shoving the kid next to him for eating him. And it's funny because if you look at a lot of the vintage games, and I tell people this all the time, if you look at a lot of the vintage games, you know, what they could concentrate on those games is one thing. They didn't have a lot of graphics to work with, and they didn't have a lot of sound to work with, but all they concerned themselves with is making something that was fun. Now, did they fail sometimes? Absolutely. Of course they failed. Of course there are games that aren't fun. But the games that are fun, or the games that, that are interesting, or the games that are unusual at that time, they almost always were a lot of fun to play. And just because they were fun to play in 1982 doesn't mean that they're not still fun to play today. People will sit there and play Pitfall or like I said, Super Nintendo and regular Nintendo. The other exhibit that we have as far as the room is concerned is the 80s bedroom. So the living room is set up as kind of like late 70s, early 80s, and that's in television area. But the 80s bedroom is set up for late 80s. So we have Blue Oyster Cult jacket hanging from the wall and from the back of the chair at the desk, and on that desk we have a Nintendo NES system, and the only game that we have in there is Super Mario Brothers Duck Hunt. But you can't walk past that exhibit without somebody sitting there shooting ducks. They're constantly playing that game, and that, young and old alike. I mean, these kids are just pick up the zapper gun and they're playing Duck Hunt, or they're playing Super Mario Brothers, and it's not just kids, guys in their late 20s or early 30s. These are 10, 11, 12-year-old little kids, 5-year-old kids sitting there playing Duck Hunt. The simplicity of these games and the fun factor of these games has not faded over time, and these kids are willing to give it a shot, and most of the time they're pleasantly surprised.
What's the gender breakdown between kids coming? I have to assume boys and girls both equally interested in this stuff. Is that right?
For the most part, yeah. I think the gender breakdown of gamers isn't as skewed to males as most people think it is. I think it's pretty close. The female gamers are just a little quieter about it, I think. But maybe they're not as loud and obnoxious is the way to put it.
Imagine
that, right? Yeah, no, that's exactly the way to put it. And it's the same in the museum. Little girls are having just as much fun as the little boys, and it's it's not really a gender thing at all. Everybody's having a blast.
All right. Well, this is the one I'm really waiting to ask you. What games are there? Like, we talked kind of about generally the exhibits and the themes, but what are the actual games that you can play at the museum, and how do you select of all the wonderful video games that you've played, that you've seen, that you've enjoyed? How do you pick which are the games that belong in a museum?
Well, they all belong in a museum, but the idea, we have a couple different concepts that were kind of floating through the museum. Is, for one example is one of the exhibits deals with controllers. So in that exhibit we have a TV set up, and I think right now we're using an Atari 2600. But the idea is to let people use weird and unusual controllers.
What are some weird and unusual controller games? I'm thinking you got some fishing games, maybe.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say, we had an Atari 2600 in that exhibit. With just last week, my partner Joe switched it over to a Dreamcast, and right now we're using Sega Bass Fishing with the fishing controller, which that people are having a blast with. But one of the other ones we used was we had an Atari 2600 set up with a controller called Lay Stick, and the Lay Stick is a joystick that you hold in your hand, but there's no base to it. So inside of this joystick there are mercury switches, and you just move the joystick in midair and you press the fire button on the top of it. But people were baffled by that joystick, and that's the whole idea. We want people to be baffled.
And that's from Atari? Like,
yeah, that's on an Atari 2600.
It's almost like a motion controller thing, but not.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not at the same time. Yeah, exactly. But people are baffled by that controller. They have no idea how to use it, and they couldn't play the game very well. But that's the fun of it. We want to put all the weirdest controllers as possible in that exhibit and let people check it out. We also have what we call the head-to-head hall, which is another section of the museum that we have. We have 12 different gaming consoles set up, and there are stools bolted to the wall. You just come up, grab a stool in front of or bolted to the floor rather. Grab a stool and play whatever game happens to be on those consoles. And we change those games up weekly. So we'll have Smash Brothers in there on N64. We have Streets of Rage 2 on the Sega Genesis, or we had Katamari Damacy on the PlayStation 2 for a while. Like I said, we have the largest collection of video games in the world, so there's nothing that limits us to what games we put in there. We just kind of grab some, whatever looks fun, whatever, and then we also at the same time, if we notice nobody's really playing this game, so we'll pull it out of the rotation and put something else in there. We've also had people come up and ask, hey, do you have this game? Well, if we can quickly grab it out of the back, we'll do that. And a couple of times we've had people ask for specific games, and we've gone in the back and pulled it out. And sometimes we don't have what they're looking for, but the idea is
this is all going down on the original consoles with the original games, right? No emulation, I assume.
No emulation. You're playing on the original console with the original controllers, and off of the original cartridges. The idea is that we want people to be able to play some of the weirder games that they've never been able to, that they otherwise might not have the chance to play, but also, at the same time, we want people to be able to play games that they've heard of, and maybe they don't own a Sega Genesis, or maybe they don't own a Saturn, or maybe they don't have a 3DO, or maybe they don't have a video game brain, because nobody has a video game brain. Well, we do, and we have all the games that were made for it. So
that's a console, a video game brain?
Yeah.
I thought you just meant like a brain for video games, but that's like a thing you can own as a video game brain.
Yeah, it's a console. It was pretty short-lived back in the early '80s. It looks more like a computer, but it's a game console, and it takes cartridges. And we put that one out there, and most people have no idea what it is. It's really kind of a bizarre system, but that's the idea. We want people to be able to, who has one of those at home? Not very many people. We have a Vectrex set up in one of the areas. People can walk up and play the Vectrex. So from the most bizarre to the most well known, there's really no limits in that area, in the head-to-head hall area, that what you might find to play.
Is there like a crown jewel, like a prize item in the collection?
Yeah, everybody asked that question. There's probably 20 things that I could name. One of the more popular ones, for example, there was a controller made by Atari. It was never released, but they were advertising it in the early '80s, called the MindLink controller, which was for the Atari 2600. And basically, what this was is it's a headband, and you strap it onto your head, and this controller supposedly could sense your thoughts.
Right. There's a few toys that do this now. Star Wars Force Tester is one I made a video with a few years back.
Right, but imagine the technology in 1982. There's no way in hell this was ever going to work. But they were developing it, and they had flyers, and they were trying to sell it, and they never actually released it, probably because they realized it was stupid and it didn't work very well. But what this controller was is you strap it onto your forehead, and if you can move your forehead in just the right direction or wrinkle it just the right way, it would pick up on the motion in your forehead. It's not reading your thoughts at all, but there are only a few of them in the world. We have 3 of them. We have one that's pretty completed. It's on display in the museum. We have a puppy pong machine. That's one of my favorite items that we have. It's pretty rare. It was a Pong console or not a console, but a derivative of the Pong arcade machine that was made by Atari. And the plan was they were going to have it licensed by Charles Schultz, and it was going to be Snoopy Pong. So it was Snoopy laying across the top of his red doghouse, and in the side of that doghouse was a CRT with 2 knobs so people can play Pong, and they were going to sell it to like doctor's office and dentist office and things like that. Well, first of all, Charles Schultz wouldn't give them the license to use Snoopy, so they couldn't paint the doghouse red or put Snoopy on it, so they changed it, and they just called it Puppy Pong, and the doghouse is yellow, and there's just some random dog that's on the top of it, but it does exist. There are I believe only 2 of those have ever been found. We have one of them in the museum. We have a Sega Neptune in the museum. The Sega Neptune was the Sega Genesis with the 32X built into it. There was only one. It's just a mock-up, but there was only one of them that's ever been found. We have the only one in the world in the museum. I'm trying to think of some of the sewing machine that connected to the Game Boy Color.
Oh, I saw a video of that recently. That was crazy.
Yeah, we have that in the museum.
I thought it was Nintendo. It's Game Boy Color?
It's Game Boy Color.
You would know. I believe you. That was I couldn't believe that when I saw that. I saw some, nuts. So it's a sewing peripheral.
Right, right, exactly.
And it's an actual sewing machine. And there's I guess digitally you can feed it patterns. I don't really know much about sewing in the first place, much less how it interacts with the Game Boy Color. But this was a legit sewing machine that connected to your Game Boy.
Yeah, we have it in one of the display cases where you can you can't use it. We don't allow people to touch it. It's pretty rare, but it's plugged into a Game Boy Color in the display case.
What would you say if I came to the museum and I just planned my vacation extremely poorly and I only had an hour there? That would be an absolute disaster if I made it there and I only had an hour there. When I go, I'm going to need a full day or 2, and I know that. But let's say I only had an hour. What would you direct me to? What do I need to see in the museum?
Yeah, you can make it. The museum is only 10,000 square feet right now. We have options for more space in the future, but right now it's only 10,000 square feet. So you can walk through the museum, not spend a lot of time at each of the exhibits, and you can get through it in a half hour or 45 minutes if you want. So if you only had an hour, I would suggest that go through. Don't spend a lot of time reading the information. Try and pick up as much visually as you can. But what I would tell you is to come back tomorrow, for God's sake.
I know.
If you were spending 45 minutes, you're missing out on so much of it. Couple of the things that really stand out in the museum is we spent a lot of time with local artists. So we had a lot of bare walls in the museum, and what we did was we put out a call to a local art organization in Frisco, and we asked them to get us some contact information for some of their artists, and we had a bunch of their artists come into the museum and paint murals all over the museum. And I'll tell you what some of those people came up with was absolutely amazing. We had a guy a local artist that did a Dragon's Lair mural in one of the corners of the museum, and it was actually featured on Don Bluth's website recently. But what this guy did in that section, you have to see it to believe it. I mean, I can describe it until I'm blue in the face. and you never get the full effect of it until you come in and see it. But that would be one of the things that I would tell people who don't have a lot of time is make sure you take in all of the art. There's just amazing artwork in there. The same guy that did the Dragon Slayer mural also did our 80s arcade. So within the museum, we have an operating 80s arcade with Pac-Man and Donkey Kong and Centipede, and they all run out. All the games cost a quarter, and everybody that comes into the museum and buys their ticket, they get four tokens to start themselves off with, and inside the arcade they can pump dollars into the change machine and get as many tokens as they want. But spend some time in the arcade. There's a lot of great games. The art in the arcade is just phenomenal. The same guy, like I said, the same guy that did the Dragon Slayer did all the walls in the arcade, and he built a 3D centipede busting out of the walls, and it's absolutely phenomenal, the artwork. But make sure in that hour that you take in some of the art that's in the museum, because it's really a sight to see, and it's a sight that isn't done justice when you see pictures online. You got to see it in person.
Now, I don't know a lot about museums, but I think if you're a museum, you got to be doing special events, right? What kind of special events are you guys running?
We haven't done any of that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to throw you under the bus.
No, it's definitely on the agenda. We talked about that a lot before we opened. The main thing...
we should stress, and I don't know if we mentioned, you guys have been open for what? Just a few months now, right?
Yeah, 8 weeks.
You've been open 8 weeks?
Yeah.
So, yeah, no special events yet. That's okay.
They're coming. But I'll tell you that we have a lot of ideas. We're going to redo the Nintendo World Championship, for example, in our head-to-head hall. We're going to set up a whole wall of Nintendos and redo that Nintendo World Championship. We had a lot of different ideas, but we kind of wanted to get our feet wet, make sure that everything was running smoothly. Like, for example, just this week, our world's largest Pong console broke, so we've kind of had to go back to the drawing board a little bit and figure out how we're going to do it, where people, I don't think anybody really abused it, but just in general use, playing that Pong console and getting kind of excited, broke a couple of the parts inside of it. So it was down for 3 or 4 days this week and just went back up today. But we kind of wanted to make sure that we had all the kinks out before we did any of that kind of thing. But we do definitely have some plans for that.
What about video game adjacent things like pinball? You guys got any pinball?
No, we kind of stayed away from pinball. We thought about putting a couple of pinball machines in the 80s arcade because 80s arcades, as we remember them, always had 2 or 3 pinball machines back in a corner, but it didn't really fit. It's the National Videogame Museum. So not that there's anything against pinball. We love pinball, but it didn't really fit in there.
There is a pinball museum. I think it's called the Pinball Museum, right, in Las Vegas?
Called the Pinball Hall of Fame.
It's a Hall of Fame, excuse me.
Yeah, it's on Tropicana Avenue, just down the street from the Tropicana Hotel. It's actually run by a gentleman called Tim Arnold, who was a pretty big arcade operator and a friend of ours. We've known Tim for years.
That place is amazing. Listeners of the show will not be surprised to learn that I'm not a huge Las Vegas guy, and I don't find there's not a ton that I love to do in Las Vegas. But when I'm there, I gotta go to that Pinball Hall of Fame. It is they've got some it's a really crazy collection. If you're ever in Vegas, just a little off the strip, I strongly recommend it.
I do too. Absolutely agree.
What about like board games? No board games. We're just on video games, right?
No, we actually did do it. One of the exhibits that, like I said, out of that 56, the list of 56, one of them that made the cut for right now was board games. We did an exhibit of video game related board games. So, back when video games were dominating every type of gaming in the early 80s, a lot of the board game manufacturers were tanking because nobody was buying their games. So what they did was, let's make some board games based on some popular video games. It was kind of interesting because the video game industry kind of fed them for a little while and kept them afloat with their Pac-Man board game and their Donkey Kong board games and Q*bert and every other game. We have hundreds of board games that are based on video games, but it was kind of interesting when we were writing the story for that exhibit how video games kind of even though video games killed the board game industry, or not killed it, but they kind of hit it pretty hard. Board game companies, they kept going, and it's interesting that board games were the ones that started taking the risks and innovating, and I don't know, both of the industries kind of fed off of each other, and they still do to this day. So we did do a board game exhibit, and it's actually pretty popular. People really get a kick out of seeing. We have probably 40 different video game related board games on display in that exhibit.
Do you guys have like one piece, like a Starry Night, that just everyone that comes to the museum has to see, something that's like the most popular piece in the museum? Or is it just Super Mario Brothers?
I'll tell you what, that stupid little duck hunt game, it's amazing.
Yeah, if you put a zapper in my hands, I would love to play Duck Hunt, because you can't play it. You can't play it anymore because it doesn't work unless you have a CRT TV. You can't, like, the zapper, the way it works, doesn't work on flat screen televisions. I actually shot a video where we used Robbie the Robot. I'm sure you guys have, like, just a garage full of Robbie the Robots. But I got one and I was very excited. And it was such an enormous pain to hook it up to the TV and get the whole thing working. So, yeah, if I had a chance to shoot that zapper and, like, feel that spring and that sound, I'd be right there.
Yeah, it's pretty popular. There's always somebody sitting there shooting ducks. I'll tell you what. And I don't want to say that one little CRT in the museum is the shining star of the whole place. It isn't. But yeah, like I said, the museum isn't that big, so I don't really know that I would say that there's any one thing that I would point people to. But you got to take in as much of it as possible, and if you take in as much as you can afford time wise, read some of the stories. There's a lot of different informational placards all over the place, and read some of the history, and you definitely it costs $12 to get into the museum. I don't think we've heard anybody who hasn't felt they got their $12 worth.
We've come all this way. And I haven't had a chance to ask, what is your favorite video game? Is there a game, or maybe two or three, that really affected you, that made you realize that video games are art, and that put you on this path to opening a video game museum with the world's largest collection of video games?
I grew up playing in television. And television was my system. We got one in 1979, and there are a couple of games on a television that really stand out to me. And the problem is in naming my favorite game is what are the criteria? So if I take nostalgia out of it, or if I only base it on nostalgia, one of my favorite games of all time is Sea Battle on Intellivision, but there's a lot of nostalgia behind that choice. So one of the games that I probably spent the most time playing is Diablo 2. I played so much Diablo 2 on the PC I wouldn't even begin to tell my wife how many hours I put into that game. She'd kill me. But I played so much Diablo 2. And an interesting side story on Diablo 2. Diablo 2 is a dungeon crawler, and it was made by Blizzard. And I don't know exactly what year it came out off the top of my head, but
late 90s maybe, 98, 99, something like that.
Yeah, maybe a little earlier than that, but that's probably about right. But in Diablo 2, it's interesting. One of our friends that we've made over the years in doing these exhibits and museum related stuff worked at Blizzard. And as he was leaving Blizzard, one of his parting gifts was they gave him this hubcap, and the hubcap basically any sound that you hear in the game of a sword clanking a sword, or something hitting a shield, or metal hitting metal, was made by somebody banging something on this very hubcap. Well, that hubcap is on display in the museum, and it's probably one of my favorite pieces in the whole.
I love that. That's so cool, and that's a great way of kind of contextualizing what it takes to make a video game, and kind of the art that goes behind it. To have this physical art. It's interesting because with movies, there's costumes and props and all these leftover artifacts, but for video games, it's just code in a computer. So that's a really great physical thing left over from the production of a classic game. You are far from the only person who. You're far from the only gamer whose game they have spent the most time with is Diablo 2. So to have that physical leftover from the production of that game, that is a great piece. I love that.
The real sad part about that is people walk through the museum, and we have a little card on the hubcap, and it's sealed in a little acrylic box hung on the wall, and there's a little card in front of it. But most people don't spend the time to read that card. And they walk by it, but every time I walk somebody around the museum, I stop and I tell them, here, and everybody loves that story. Even if they're not a huge Diablo 2 fan, everybody loves that story. But most people don't spend enough time or don't read enough to understand. Hey, what the hell is this hubcap hanging on the wall for? But once you know the story, it's a great story.
Yeah, well, I gotta tell you, I love what you're doing here. Next time you see the mayor of Frisco, you can let him know that your work has significantly raised Frisco's ranking on the list of cities I need to visit. Significantly. It's amazing. Like, you're right. It's perfect. Like, of course this needs to exist. It's so great that you guys have built I don't know, a place to teach this stuff. And like I said when we started, my favorite things for the show are things that you're surprised to hear they exist, and then you think about it and you're like, of course it exists. And as soon as I heard about this, I was like, finally, of course this exists. And I can't wait to visit and see it with my own eyes.
Well, let us know when you're coming down. I'll personally walk you through it. You'll have a blast.
I will take you up on that, Sean. Thanks so much for talking about this afternoon.
No problem. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, folks, that's what I got for you for this week's Jeff Rubin Show. I've been on vacation for a few weeks. This one was recorded a few weeks ago. I haven't recorded an episode in a few weeks, which is pretty unusual for me. And I'm excited to kind of dive in and start turning out some more of these Year 6 episodes. Lots of good stuff coming, and you'll be the first to know about it if you follow me on Twitter, where I'm at Jeff Rubin Show, on my YouTube account, that's youtube.com/Jeff Rubin. I got a Facebook fan page. I got an Instagram. You can even sign up for an email newsletter if you go to jeffrubin.com, and you can get every episode of this show ever for free. And I'd love to hear from you via any of the previously mentioned avenues about people you would like to hear on the show in the future. And my email address is on that website, jeffrubin.com or jeffrubinshow.com. So there's no excuse for not reaching out to me and letting me know who you think would be a good Jeff Rubin Show guest. I'm out of ideas. I'm just kidding. I got plenty of ideas. But some of the best ones come from you guys, so I'm always asking for them, just shamelessly groveling, and why don't we leave it here? I'll see you guys in 2 weeks, but for now, bye.